Hello, welcome to the first online-only Melbourne AWS user group here in lockdown. It's been about 8 weeks, I think, since we've seen everybody. We apologise for March's event, given it was the week before our event that everything started to escalate. And we had speakers pulling out, and it just seemed like everything was against us for the time being. But we have invested that time wisely. We've spent the last 6 weeks making this the best possible online event that we can organize, and technical issues notwithstanding, hopefully everything stays up and my MacBook doesn't catch on fire, and we should be able to have a great event. So first off, let's see what we've got here. So tonight's agenda, if you've ever been to one of our events before, is very similar to our standard agenda. During the introductions now, then I'll throw over to Ian and JM for what's new. Straight after that, we have the first of our 2 presentations tonight from Dawn, who is talking about automating security checks with Amazon Inspector. After that, we'll have a brief 20-minute break or so, where I will have a chat with Rob Linton, the founder of the Melbourne AWS user group, looking back a little bit on the history of the group, as well as then making some announcements and looking forward to the future of the group. Then our second presentation of the night, Ian McKay is going to run through his AWS account controller, which I'm really looking forward to. I think this has been a long time in the making. We'll wrap up then, and we also have a post-show event on Zoom, like just a social catch-up as well, to go after this. So before we kick into things, just a brief notice on how tonight is going to work. We'll have our usual presentation, during which time you have the opportunity to ask questions. So we'll be taking questions in our Slack team. So that's melb.awsug.org.au/Slack if you want to get on Slack team. We'll have a slide about that later on. You can also ask questions on Twitter using the hashtag AWSMelb. Or you can ask in the YouTube chat where you're watching this right now. After the presentation, myself or Ian will come back on. We'll ask some of the presenters some of the questions on your behalf, and we'll have a good chance to have a talk through what some of those questions are then. The other thing is that comments are welcome. Like, we really love feedback here. Feel free to leave comments on the channels that I mentioned before, or just talk to us directly as well. If any good comments out there, we may include them in the stream as well to bring them up into the show. So as usual, we need to thank our sponsors, particularly our gold sponsor Enabler, who has been a great help and source of support in the last 6 weeks as we sought to transition from a primarily physical meetup into an online only one for the time being. They've been a really good help to us as well. We really appreciate them sticking with us for 2020. Our silver sponsors for 2020 as well, AC3 and CMD, also being very valuable during this time. So a brief note on who we are in case you haven't seen me before. My name is Rob. I've been running this for about 1.5 years now, and yeah. We also have Ian, who you'll see on the stream in just a moment. One of the questions that we usually get asked by new people who attend our events is, what role do we play at AWS? And we're very proud to say that we're fully independent from AWS. We're members of the community, same as everybody else. We're volunteers here. We don't get paid or anything like that, and we certainly don't work for Amazon either. So what does that mean? That means that all comments are welcome. We don't have to toe any sort of company line or anything like that. If you have something that's not so great about Amazon you want to say, feel free to say it around here, as long as it's constructive. So if you do want to get in touch, we have a very active and vibrant Slack team. It's actually one of the largest Slack teams for AWS in the world, definitely the largest in Australia. It's a great place to ask questions. It's especially good if you're stuck at home and you can't talk to colleagues or anything as easily as you might have been able to in the past. We also have areas for discussing AWS outages It gets particularly active during AWS outages as everybody tries to figure out what's going on. There's also announcements. There's areas for jobs as well if you're in the marketplace for work or in the marketplace to hire. We don't have our marketplace segment on tonight. We couldn't make that work technically in time, but you are welcome to join our jobs channel. And there's also a great place for volunteers to get in touch with the group. Speaking of, we're always on the lookout for speakers, especially at times like these. We're still looking for sponsors for 2020 to meet some of our objectives later in the year, and we're always looking for help. Putting on a live stream, we've got websites to look after, we've got videos to edit, all sorts of things that needs to be done. Even in the current climate, when we don't have a physical event to put on, there's still a lot of work to do. So we always appreciate the help. A little bit on what's new. We launched a podcast a couple of weeks ago, looking to fill the content void that we had at the time, but we have some great plans for it going forward. You can check out the first episode on our website already or in your favorite podcast app. And I believe we'll be recording the second episode this week, but Ian will speak to that during his segment. The other things that are going on, I assume most people know, given that it was supposed to be a month ago, that Amazon cancelled their summit in Sydney. And it was my first summit that I was going to be able to attend in 3 years too, so I was pretty disappointed with that. But they have announced a new online summit, and it's going to be Australia and New Zealand wide. I think they're actually running a few summits around the world on the same day, so it'll be particularly interesting to see how they pull that off. But it's on May 13th, and there's a quick link in the on the website just there, or just search on the web. And because COVID-19 knows boundaries, why do we know boundaries? The Sydney user group has an event coming up next week as well. Why not drop in over there and have a look, see what they do up in Sydney. I know the Adelaide group is putting on a particularly interesting event in May as well. They just haven't announced the dates yet. But if you're at all interested, it's worth signing up for the Adelaide meetup as well and making sure you're on top of their events. Programming and Tools one is having an event that is particularly relevant at the moment. They're talking about building your own video conferencing platform on AWS. I believe they use Big Blue Button for that, which I've looked at myself, so I'm actually probably going to be very interested in attending this one. But it's about building your own video conferencing platform that's so if you don't have to rely on the Zooms of the world with their potentially lax security and that sort of stuff. So that's all of the news that I have here. I'll throw over to Ian now, who will run through what's new in AWS.
Assuming everything works here. Thank you, Rob. Wonderful intro. As Rob mentioned, we had a podcast, and the first episode was missing what's new segment from last month. And yes, the plan is to record a longer version of what we're talking about tonight as well. This means we can go a bit deeper. We don't have time limits where we keep our presenters, who are of course the stars of our evenings, waiting. And as you can see tonight, I'm joined by JM, live from location at some data center somewhere.
Hello everyone.
But let's dive into it. We actually have quite a few things in Sydney this month. Again, to reiterate, because we did the podcast last month, we didn't have this version of our What's New section, but we are measuring everything from the podcast on for here today. So, in Sydney, I particularly like the fact that we have a ground station thing here now, which is Awesome. And if anybody has any projects they're working on that need it, please contact me. JM, anything for you that jumps out?
You just want to, you just pay for the actual antenna time you use. So that's pretty cool. You don't have to buy your own antenna and your own satellite. You just pay for the number of hours you use the antenna. So a very long booking in advance, but yeah, it's good stuff to do. Fargate support of EKS. Everybody was waiting for that. Arjen, you're happy?
Fargate is the best way to run containers. We all know that.
No support for GPU though, and only in private subnet. So not everything can be run in there, but much better than trying to run your own nodes.
Yeah.
And then transit gateway inter-regional peering. I think that's really good that we have that in Sydney now. You can connect multiple regions together. One tip though, you need to have an ISN number per transit gateway because in the future, AWS might introduce BGP as well between these transit gateway. The other one is just private routing. So it's private routing, but now in the future, BGP might be introduced. So it's important to set up right. Otherwise, you need to destroy everything and start again.
Yeah. And or has support for Postgres 11, which is good if you use that. So moving on to the next section, some serverless announcements. One interesting one in a way is that Amazon Keyspaces went GA. Keyspaces, you may know that previously as managed Cassandra service. I'm guessing there was an issue with the name that they changed it at the last moment, but it's now available. So if you're looking for a Cassandra database, this is your chance. You can now also export HTTP APIs as an Open API 3.0. This makes it easier to, after you've spun one up, you can play around with it and update the new version. So all good. JM?
RDS proxy for Postgres. I think it's a very interesting product for very highly available database. There is no pricing yet, so I'm a bit concerned. We don't know how much it's going to cost, but it's really create that interface between your application users and the database. You can scale. If you have a failover, DNS doesn't have to catch up. It's still the same endpoint for your users. So really interesting product to run that across availability zone and at scale. I like it, but I'm a bit scared about the price when it's going to come out.
Yeah. To create the MySQL version of this was announced around reInvent. So this is in addition to that for those who like Postgres better. So if we then look at container news, so there's a couple of things here that are quite interesting. Most interesting to me again is the top one on the list here, that the support for EFS in ECS, which includes both ECS on EC2 and Fargate on ECS Fargate. This basically, especially the Fargate option, is the first time you can give your containers persistent storage easily with full Fargate instance, which can have some nice use cases.
Yeah, something like WorkPrice and Drupal and Jira, all of them need a kind of permanent storage. So to run that in containers with EFS in the backend, multi-AZ, that's pretty cool. And this month as well, EFS has been announced for an increase in read speed for 400% for the general purpose product. So now you can have the cheapest EFS, 400% increase rate, and then connect that to your containers. So yeah, pretty good news today.
Yeah, that is good. The other items also interesting. App Mesh, which is the service mesh solution from AWS that you can now connect servers from multiple accounts. That's always cool. And some EKS updates. But in the interest of time, we'll move on a bit. So on the dev and ops side, I am missing something. So chatbot is GA. If you don't know chatbot, it's been used and pulled out by AWS for the past year, I think. It basically allows you to more easily have a connection between your Slack or Chime, if you happen to use that, and your AWS accounts for notifications and taking actions, things like that. So that's good.
Yeah, in the same, because there is a GA now, you can integrate that with the CodeStar product that was missing in the code commit and code pipeline environment to be able to have some proper notification in there, except by email. So now you can have all your pipeline failure, success, and all that sent to Slack automatically at no cost. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. EC2 Image Builder now supports more than just Amazon Linux 2 and Windows, which makes it a lot more useful for a lot of use cases. So it's fun.
Yeah, I think more and more companies are going to use that instead of using other products like Packer and stuff like that. That's the AWS offering.
Another item that I thought I'd put on this slide was an announcement from this morning, which is that it's now only in preview, but you can do live patching of your Amazon Linux 2 instances, which basically means you can patch the kernel without needing to do a reboot. So this would help in uptime if you're not running your instances in a auto-scaling group.
Nice.
On the security side, why don't you start on this one, Jay?
Oh, Detective, yeah, another AI system that AWS bring to us to help us to do security across the account. Very interesting. Gather CloudTrail, VPC flow log, and all sorts of things again, and then do some AI on top of it. A bit of reservation. I look at the cost, and I heard some kind of bill shock. It's $2.5 per gigabyte. So if you have 500 gig of logs getting ingested, that's $1,200 US a month. That can become very expensive. So after the 30 days free trial, I think I will recommend that for banks and big companies who need that level of detective, not for everybody users.
Okay. Well, we'll have to pay attention to this cost.
Yeah.
Another thing then is IAM Access Analyzer, which is basically which you can use to track access from all the different account users that get access to your account. It's basically a tool to see what people do with your access in a more clear manner than just going through a CloudTrail.
Or looking at JSON file, yeah.
Yeah. And the ability to track changes to secrets in Secrets Manager is also good, so you can see when changes were made and by who and things like that.
So you need to have AWS config for that, right?
Yeah.
The news is about integrating Secret Manager with AWS config to track who does what with CloudTrail at what time, and if a password gets changed, who did it. So that's a config integration. Very good.
So some other cool stuff. AWS has been very busy. They opened not one but two new regions in the past couple of weeks, one in South Africa and one in Milan. New regions is, of course, always fun.
That's impressive with people not traveling the world and then being locked down. Right? That's I must say, it's very impressive.
I have to say it's super impressive, especially in Milan, where I think everything was completely shut down for the past month, but somehow they still managed it.
They installed some bed behind me, and then they were sleeping in the data center, and this is what happened.
Yeah. Also, a third availability zone is now available in Canada. This means that every region except for Beijing now has 3 availability zones. So I should say, except for Beijing and the special region in Osaka. That one is still just one, but that will change by next year, I believe. But of course, the biggest news of all is that GA release of Deep Composer. If you were around at our reInvent meetup, you will have seen me play that wonderful device, and your ears probably recovered by the next day. But yeah, it's fun to play with, and you can just use it in the console. You don't need an actual hardware device for it.
Control tower with existing organization. Yeah, great, but you look at it, it's a Python script that you need to run yourself with a couple of roles. That takes 30 minutes per account, and you can do one account at a time. So I'm not sure if that's going to cut what an organization needs to do, but it's a first step for Control Tower to be able to ingest a new account. Good direction, but still going to be a very cumbersome process.
And the last thing we'll mention before we go to our presentation is, thankfully, you no longer have to have secure connections for FTP into Amazon. I honestly have no idea.
Why? Yes.
I'm sure there was some big company that wanted this. It's available now.
From mainframe to AWS.
Yeah. With that, Rob, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, guys. So we've got our first presentation of the night. Dawn recorded a brief look at Amazon Inspector for us earlier today. She will be on to answer questions after. Here we go.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that you're all keeping well in these trying times. I'm here tonight to tell you a story. It is a story about a production incident. It is a story about how we debugged it, and it is a story about how we resolved it. During the story, I live will be answering questions through the Slack channel and the YouTube comments. So if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to just type them in, and I will respond to them as we go. So, first of all, I should probably tell you a little bit about who I am. My name is Dawn. I am an associate DevOps/SRE at MYOB. I have worn both hats. And I am something of an automation enthusiast. The sort of phrase that I like to use to describe this is, why fix it twice when you can automate it once? If you have a production issue, I don't want to see that being something where you have run books and you deal with it every time it occurs. I want people to automate solutions, and I like to see things to be fixed permanently. Outside of work, I am an occasional author and kitchen alchemist. Sometimes that ends really well, sometimes it doesn't. I am also a raging sports ball fan, which is why that picture of me is me at Marvel Stadium. So, the story that I'm going to tell you tonight starts with a warning. And this warning came not from someone that I was employed with, but from a friend of mine who is fairly well connected to the security landscape in IT and particularly in terms of Microsoft products. They basically warned me that there was a zero-day vulnerability that was about to come out from Microsoft and told me that when I went into work the next day, I should make sure that we patched all of our instances. So I filed that information away, get into work the next day, and sure enough, as soon as I arrive into work, it is announced that there has been a zero-day vulnerability from Microsoft, and part of the zero-day vulnerability that was disclosed is a vulnerability that targeted the remote desktop protocol, which allows you to remote into machines that are hosted somewhere else from your local computer. That vulnerability allowed arbitrary code execution, and I'm fairly sure that everyone here will have some understanding of why that could potentially be an issue. So, my colleagues and I, with the warning in mind, sat down, we looked at what we were working with, tried to get our head around it, and then we got to work. Effectively, the problem that we were dealing with, without wanting to give away too much about our production infrastructure, was that we had workloads running on Amazon EC2 instances, which were accessible via remote desktop protocol. And in some cases, when you have workloads that are accessible through EC2, they are effectively accessible to the whole internet. Now, the way that you lock that down is by using security rules on your VPCs and security rules on your security groups, which will lock that access down to a subset of IP addresses. Usually you'd be looking at a corporate VPN. The problem with that is that if you mess that up, then those instances can potentially be open to the entire internet, as many people in this industry have found out at various points, to their detriment. So, in order to actually resolve this issue, what we basically needed to know was not how are we going to take these instances down and immediately patch them. It was more, could someone have exploited the vulnerability already? Have we got configurations that are potentially open to the internet? And how much time do we have to patch our instances? And are there any quick fixes that we can come up with that will actually buy ourselves some time to plan out our patching strategy, work out what we want to do, and not have to just take instances down in the middle of the day, which is what we would potentially have had to do if we were responding to this reactively. Enter Amazon Inspector. Effectively, Amazon Inspector is a tool that you can use to check the security of EC2 instances. So at its simplest, it will scan for network-related issues like, do you have any ports that are open to the internet? Do you have methods of access that should be locked down? And in its more complex form, it can actually look at, are you running software that doesn't meet security best practices? Are you running software that has known vulnerabilities in it? And it's something that can be used both proactively and reactively. So you can automate it, you can integrate it into your build pipelines. We'll get to that later. But in this case, we wanted to use it reactively. So we basically wanted to just run a quick check, see whether there were any security issues that we could solve quickly, which would then buy us time to sit down and plan out how we were going to take the instances offline. Now, Amazon Inspector has different tiers of recommendations. You've got high risk recommendations, medium risk recommendations, low risk recommendations, and informational recommendations. The high tier findings are sort of the really egregious misconfigurations, okay, these are things that you need to respond to immediately, all your ports are open to the internet, that's a problem. Medium and low tier findings are generally things that you should investigate, understand why it is that you're getting those warnings back. Some of those may be acceptable depending on the way that your instances are configured and what you're trying to actually do with them. But generally, those are the sorts of things that you want to look into and see, can you improve this? Informational findings indicate a potential security issue that's not currently active, but they are findings that you can sort of look at and will give you some more information about where you might focus your efforts in the future. And the best thing about Amazon Inspector is it's really easy to get started with it. So here we're looking at a screenshot from an AWS account that has never used Inspector before. You get a page that gives you some information on what it does and how to use it. Most of that's cut off because of my screen resolution. But in order to get started with this, we just need to hit the button in the middle of the page that says Get Started. And that will bring us to a view that looks something like this. So we note here that Amazon Inspector has two different types of assessments that we can run. We can run network assessments and we can run host assessments. So the network assessments are basically just looking at the networking configuration in the sense of, do we have ports that are globally reachable that shouldn't be? Have we got a VPC that's perhaps not locked down? Have we got instances that should be private but are actually public? Those sorts of things. And we also have host assessments, which are a little bit more complex and cost a little bit more. We'll get into the pricing later, which are looking for things like known vulnerable software and are benchmarking your instances against security best practices. Now, there is also an option for some advanced configuration. So let's briefly take a look at that. What we see here is this basically allows you to configure what you're actually doing a bit more fine-grained. So maybe you want to look at security best practices, but you don't want to look at common vulnerabilities. You have the option to cut down sort of the scope of what it is that you're actually looking at, and you can do all of that here. But for the purposes of this, what we're going to do is we're just going to take it and we're going to run the standard assessment. Now, you can't see it, again, because of my screen resolution, but at the bottom of the page, you have the option to run Amazon Inspector once or to schedule it to run weekly. Scheduling it to run weekly is something that's good if you want to get constant updates on what your security posture looks like. You can also integrate it into your CI/CD pipelines. Again, that's something that we're going to look at later. But for now, we're just going to run this once and see what the findings are that we get back. Now, what I've done is I've created a couple of EC2 instances which are configured in ways that will basically give us findings back. So Amazon Inspector will take a couple of minutes to run, and then we can have a look at the findings. Now, as we can see there, we've got a couple of informational findings. We've got a couple of low-risk findings. We've got a medium-risk finding. So if we take a look indeed at one of those low-risk findings, what we actually find here is, or this is one of the informational findings, what we actually find here is it's telling us we have these groups of ports that are open to the internet. Now, in some situations, that would be a concern, but what this setup actually is it's taken from something that I did for AWS Programming and Tools, and it's the setup that you would use to run an open source video conferencing software called Big Blue Button on EC2. So that large range of UDP ports that's open, that range is open because Big Blue Button requires it to be open in order to be able to parse video and audio information through the software. So in this case, although we are getting an alert back, this is working as intended. However, if we go and take a look at that medium risk alert that we had, which is one of the ones that you'd probably be concerned about, what we find here is that that's TCP port 22, which is the SSH port, which is open to the internet. And again, when you're dealing with vulnerabilities that could potentially cause arbitrary code execution, I'm sure I don't need to explain to everyone why this configuration is a bad idea. So we've seen now what Amazon Inspector's findings will generally look like. Let's take this one step further and let's actually automate it into a CI/CD pipeline. Now, for this, I am using Azure pipelines, and I recognize that considering that this is an AWS meetup, this is a little bit sacrilegious. There are a couple of reasons why I'm doing that, though. The first one is Azure pipelines is very simple, and surprisingly, it actually integrates really well with AWS with some of the tools that have been built in the Azure Pipelines marketplace. But the main reason that I'm doing this is that Azure Pipelines has a free tier and is also free for open source. So I can throw all of this code up on GitHub, which I have done, and you can then fork it and try it yourself in Azure Pipelines without having to pay anything. If you want to take a look at that code, the link is here. Now, having a look at what the pipeline actually does, we've got a CloudFormation stack that basically sets up two instances, and they look very similar to the instances that we had in the previous slides. We've got one which uses the standard configuration for Big Blue Button. We've got another one that is using a configuration where port 22 is open to the internet. And both of these instances in this case are T2 micros, so as long as you spin them down, they will be covered by the free tier and you won't actually be charged for it. And then Once the Azure pipeline runs that CloudFormation stack, then we're doing a scan using the Amazon Inspector API that will actually bring us back and will show us what is going on and what the security recommendations are. So if we run that pipeline, and I was going to try and do a video demonstration here, but unfortunately I wasn't able to get it to hook up. But let's just take a look at some screenshots of what we actually get back. So from the build steps, if we go in and actually take a look here, we can see that the API has run its assessment once the CloudFormation stack was complete, and we've got a response back from it. And we can go in here and have a look at, okay, so we've got this nice structure. It's telling us, as we saw earlier, we've got a medium finding, we've got 2 low findings, and we've got 2 informational findings. And then you can open that up and basically get all of the information back. Now, the pricing for Amazon Inspector is actually quite reasonable. I know I mentioned it a couple of times earlier, but it's based on 2 different things. So first of all, it's based on the number of EC2 instances that you're actually scanning. The size is completely irrelevant in this case. We're only worried about the number of instances that you're scanning. And the second thing that we're looking at is the type of assessment. So when we were looking at the assessments earlier, we saw that there were assessments for network reachability rules and that there were assessments for host assessment rules. So the pricing for those is different. However, it is worth noting that for both of those types of assessments, the first 250 assessments that you do are free. So depending on the size of your production workload, that will give you a chance to test it out for a couple of weeks, get your head around what it actually does, and see whether this is an appropriate tool for you to be using. Once you hit those 250 assessments, you then end up with pricing on a monthly basis. So for the network rules assessments, the first 250 assessments cost you 15 cents, the next 750 cost you 13 cents, the next 4,000 cost you 10 cents, the next 45,000 after that cost you 7 cents, and after that, all assessments cost you 4 cents. So you're looking at a maximum of 15 cents per instance, and the larger your workload is, the more you're running Amazon Inspector in a month, the cheaper those assessments are going to become. So for the host assessment rules, they're a little bit more expensive, and that's because you need to have an agent installed on your instances, and the analysis that they're doing is a bit more complicated, sort of a bit more complex in terms of compute power. But even then, for the first 250 assessments per month, you're only looking at 30 cents per instance. For the next 750, it's 25 cents. For the next 4,000 after that, it's 15 cents. For the next 45,000, it's 10 cents. And all assessments after that are 5 cents. So that means that to run the full suite of Amazon Inspector assessments on an instance, the maximum amount that that's ever going to cost you is 45 cents per instance. And again, the first 250 assessments are free. So that will allow you to run it against your production workload and get a feel for whether it's an appropriate tool for you to use. You really do, by the way, have to be running a lot of instances to hit that 50K threshold, or you have to be running Amazon Inspector very frequently, like have it integrated into a CI/CD pipeline that's running multiple times a day. I have seen production workloads where the cost of running Amazon Inspector in production, even bundled into a CI/CD pipeline, only ends up being about $10 to $12 a month. And obviously, all of these prices are in US dollars. So you do have to be aware of the fact, obviously, if we're talking about Australian dollars and exchange rates, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. There are also a couple of tools that you can use to understand what the AWS pricing might look like. AWS has a pricing calculator. So if you know what your production workload looks like, if you know how many times a month you're likely to be running Amazon Inspector, you can plug that in and it will give you an approximate cost. AWS also has a total cost of ownership calculator, and that will allow you to basically work out the cost for your entire workloads. So before I finish up, there are a couple of other things that I want to talk about, and one of them is the sort of cost-benefit analyses that we have to actually do here. The thing about Amazon Inspector is that the sliding scale means that if you have really large workloads, they're going to cost you less per instance. If you are going over that 50,000 assessments per month, you're talking less than 10 US cents to actually run that assessment, which is not too bad. And the other thing that you have to remember is that proactive use of Inspector can potentially actually avoid security issues. So in that respect, it acts in much the same way as guard duty, in that if you have issues, you're going to be made aware of them before they potentially become an issue. And when you deal with sort of production issues like the ones that we had, checking those instances manually takes a lot of engineers' time, and it takes a lot of money to actually do that. And if something goes really wrong and someone manages to get into one of your instances, that is potentially going to cost you a lot more money then. And particularly on large workloads, manual checks might well end up missing issues. So that's something that you sort of have to be aware of. Then the other thing that I want to talk about is sort of in terms of the use case that I had, where we were dealing with an issue where Amazon Inspector, we were basically using it to buy ourselves time. The thing with that is that even if you're using Amazon Inspector reactively, again, it's analyzing those instances manually takes a lot of engineers' time and a lot of money. And what you're really worried about in terms of those analyses is not so much, okay, we need to, immediately deal with this. What you're trying to do is basically pick the low-hanging fruit. So resolve any issues that you can resolve quickly, which will then allow you time to make a coordinated plan to actually bring the instance down and patch it, which in that case of the production issue is what we ended up doing. So to recap, Amazon Inspector is a tool that's basically used for checking security of EC2 instances. That includes both network security and security of any programs that might be running on the actual machine, including the operating system. It's something that can be used both proactively and reactively. In that, within AWS, you can schedule it or you can run it once if you have a security incident and you need to respond to it. You can schedule it within AWS, you can schedule it weekly. You can also automate it into your build pipeline so that it runs every time you have a production deployment. Now, what that actually allows you to do is to look at the configuration and go, okay, are there any issues here where something has gone wrong, someone has potentially misconfigured a CloudFormation template, and then you're able to respond to that rather than having it become more of an issue down the line. And the maximum that you're ever going to pay for this is 45 US cents per instance to run those scans. If your workload is very small, it's going to be fairly cheap to run this. If you are running the simpler scans, so just the network assessments, again, it's going to be cheaper than running the full host assessment to find out whether there's any vulnerable programs on that machine. And the first 250 scans are free, which does give you an opportunity to look at, is this the right tool for our organization? Does this actually do what we want it to do? And provided that your production workload is not exceptionally large, that will give you the chance to try it for maybe 2-3 weeks, see how you feel about it. So we've reached the end of the presentation tonight. I'm aware that this has probably not covered everything, but I'm hoping that this is a really good basic introduction to Amazon Inspector and why you might want to use it. I imagine that I have been answering questions in the comments as we've gone, but if you do have any more questions, now is the time to ask them. So feel free to ask them either in the Slack channel or the YouTube comments, and I will respond accordingly. Otherwise, it has been lovely to record this talk for all of you to listen to tonight. I hope to get some good feedback on this. I hope that it has given you some information that you can then take back to your workplaces. And I hope that I will converse with you and potentially see some of you in the future once we're out of isolation.
Cool. Thank you very much, Dawn, for that. That was recorded a little bit earlier, but she has joined us on Skype to answer some questions. Let's see if I can find the right button. Here we go. Here we go. Dawn, can you hear me? Oh, hang on. Try now.
I can.
A lot going on at once, all at once. Here we go. So we've had a few questions come through in the YouTube channel. I see you've been answering them as well, but we'll probably go through them a little bit here for the benefit of people who might be watching this later.
Yes.
Helps if I get in my box on the screen. So first question was from Simon McKinnon. So when you do your inspector runs, is that done via the console or was it via the CLI?
So for this talk, I used a combination of both. The first time that I actually introduced here's what the console looks like, I did that first run in the console. And at the stage that Simon had asked that question, we hadn't actually been through the pipeline section of the talk yet. That's all done through the AWS CLI. So if you go and look at the Azure pipelines file for that, and yes, I do know that's a bit sacrilegious, but if you go and look at the Azure pipelines file for that, it's using the AWS CLI task to
Cool.
run those scans.
Awesome. And that's all right. You can use Azure pipelines right here. I used a lot of GitHub actions myself. So, so our second question was from Guy Morton. Do you mean that the assessment from 1 to 250 was $0 and then everything after is 15 cents each?
So effectively, the clarification for that is that the first 250 assessments basically are a free trial in the same sense that the AWS free tier is or guard duty is, and that's the first 250 assessments ever. And then it rolls over to monthly pricing, which is basically a price per instance, and you get discounts for running it on a large volume of instances every month. Discounts per instance, I hesitate to add.
Okay, so unlike the normal free picking up everything in the chat anyway, and then you'll be around for the rest of the night to answer any more if there are any more.
I most certainly will be. And if you are interested in having a go with it, the link to the GitHub for the pipelines demo that I did was on the slides. I will also put it in the YouTube chat and I will put it in the Slack channel. My intention is over the next 3-4 weeks to try and build that out into something more fully fleshed. My feeling from having played with it is that particularly the CLI for this is not very mature. So I'm going to go away and see whether I can do a bit of scripting to fill some of the holes in the way that the CLI works at the moment. So if you're interested in it, do take a look at that.
Cool. I definitely will. It's something that I haven't really had the chance to look into myself, but it's something that's, as you say, it's definitely worth being on the front foot with security issues like that. And this is something that helps you do that.
Most definitely.
Great. Thank you very much for tonight, Dawn.
Not a problem.
We'll talk to you a bit later.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got our quick intermission now. It's probably about 20 minutes long or so. I can see Rob has joined us on the Slack channel, on the Skype call. Rob, you're still muted there by the look of it. But it's all right. Let's jump into our intermission. We'll have a look back at the history of the AWS user group and then some announcements going forward.
Yes.
Hang on a second, Rob. I can hear you, but I'm getting a Skype logo. You don't have a video camera turned on?
I should have.
I can see you there. That's interesting.
I'll turn it off and then turn it back on again.
Oh, hang on a minute. That's my bad. There we go. Now I can see you.
Yeah, g'day.
How you going?
Yeah, good.
So welcome to our first live stream under lockdown. It seems to be going all right so far, except for the few technical hiccups we've had here or there.
I noticed a few COVID haircuts.
No, it's actually I had a haircut about a week ago.
Oh,
that's
just normal. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. That's all right. It never looks that great anyway. So we just wanted to celebrate this moment in time with just to have a look back at the history of the user group, and especially the stuff that you've done in the last, I think it's 8 years now. In July, that will be 9 years. It's 2020, isn't it? 9 years. 9 years since the first event.
The first meetup was on the 21st of August 2011.
Yep, so 9 years. What was your motivation for starting it off?
Well, to be honest, I just published a book on Amazon AWS back then, and I don't recommend anyone buy it today since it's 9 years out of date. Back in those days, there were only 4 Amazon products actually available, and they actually listed them in the title bar across the top of the screen. There were that few.
Wow, it's like the old Google homepage. They had only one product.
Yeah, and there wasn't a user group in Australia at that time.
We do proudly still say that we were the first. So.
And we were.
Yeah. I think there's some old photos on the website. I think you had like 7 attendees at that first event. How did you actually go about finding them?
Well, that's actually an interesting story in its own right. Back in those days, I don't know if anyone remembers a gentleman by the name of Simon Bernozzi. He was the first evangelist for Amazon in APAC, and he's since moved on. Now he's one of the partners of a big VC firm in Silicon Valley. But he actually had an evangelist kind of meet and greet in Melbourne, and he was very kind to announce our first meetup, and in fact came along to the first meetup and was our first presenter.
Wow, okay. Well, there goes my question I had later on. The first time you had AWS present was at the first meetup.
Well, that's right. Technically, it was our first meetup, yes.
Cool. How fast did it grow after that?
Oh, look, it's been steady. I'm not quite sure. I think we're up to, what are the latest numbers, Rob? 4,500 members.
Just about 4,500, yeah.
Plus minus. And it's pretty steady. As you can imagine, if a user group's been running for 9 years, if we have a few people join every week, the numbers stack up. And Amazon AWS has always been a popular topic for people to be interested in, and it's very topical. And it weirdly enough, in the current crisis, even more so.
That's true. Did you have any issues like spreading the word early on, aside from your evangelist?
No, we didn't do anything. We just put the group up on Meetup, and just basically had a meetup every month. We supplied beer and pizza, free of charge to anyone who turned up. And in the early days, I was paying for all of that, and I think I paid for that for the first 4 or 5 years actually.
Wow.
Before we got big enough to have people sponsor us, and but then we kind of got to a certain size, and people are interested to kind of pay for the beer and pizza for us. And as you know, now it's a kind of a big enterprise, and we have sponsors lining up to sponsor us, and we have great meetups every month. And I must say, you're doing a great job, Rob, in making sure that's chugging
Thank
along.
you. What was always one of the things I hated the most was trying to track down someone to pay for the beer and pizza every month. It's one of the reasons why I moved to an annual sponsorship model.
Yeah.
So the original events used to be held in the old York Butter Factory on King Street. What was the first time that you filled that? Because that only fits about 45 people or so, but I've seen more than 100 in there easily.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting. The very first time we filled it was when Werner Vogels turned up, and I remember this story. It's quite a funny story actually. He was in Australia with his family on a holiday, and I don't use Twitter on a day-to-day basis. I do have an account. But Werner uses it quite a lot. And I did send him a tweet just saying, hey, look, we're having a user group tonight. If you're around, please feel free to drop in. Didn't really think much of it. And lo and behold, we had a meetup, and in rocks Werner with his entourage. And it was like a spearhead sort of in triangular formation, with Werner at the front and sort of some Amazon assistants behind, and a few more Amazon assistants behind that, and so on. And they all kind of crowded into the user group. There was about 10 of them. And he actually presented as well during that user group. And I remember I thought he might turn up. So I had a football, And, you know, when you buy slabs of beer for user group, sometimes you get freebies, and we had this Aussie Rules football. I thought, oh, well, if he does turn up, I'll give him this Aussie Rules football. And so we did. Everyone at the user group that was there on that night signed this football and gave it to Werner, which he took away with him. And I've met Werner on a few occasions since then over in the States, and I always ask him, you know, well, I always say hello. And he never remembers who I am. Never. He's not one to remember who I am. But when I mention the football, he always goes, oh, right, you're the Melbourne user group. That's right, I remember that football.
Right, so if we ever meet him again, we'll have to have something memorable with us.
Just remind him of the Aussie Rules and he'll remember.
Awesome. So we've already seen a couple of good stories from the old days. What are like the craziest or the best presentation you've had?
Look, it's actually, I mean, as you can imagine, running a user group, sometimes presenters cancel, and sometimes they cancel 10 minutes before the user group. And
sometimes they just don't show up.
Yeah, and you're kind of left trying to fill in a hole. We were very lucky in the early days. York Butter Factory was a fantastic experience. I had my own startup down there in York Butter Factory. I knew all the guys down there, and basically, if someone didn't turn up, I just ran around all the guys and said, hey, look, anyone wants to stand up and talk about their startup for 20 minutes, there's a spot available. And, of course, we would always find someone who was willing to talk about their startup for 20 minutes. I actually ended up having some great presentations completely off the cuff, no preparation whatsoever. And, in fact, probably the most bizarre presentation was I actually did that roundup and couldn't find a single person to present. So I actually stood up there and spent 20 minutes talking about my latest failed startup, which had nothing to do with Amazon AWS at all. But still turned out to be a mildly entertaining event because, as we know, everyone in the IT industry dreams of starting their own startup and making their millions, obviously. So it was a great experience to kind of explain the process, the pros and cons, and how sometimes these things don't end up with a happy ending.
Yeah, it's always good to hear the other side of the fence. Like, you hear a lot about the unicorns and stuff that have come through, but yeah, not everyone can be that lucky on the first go.
No, well, that's right. I've had a few goes.
So I'm not sure if a lot of people know it actually, but you were named Amazon AWS Community Hero for quite a while there. How did that feel?
I was, yeah. So I was the first Amazon AWS Community Hero for Australia, and that was awarded 5 years ago. They actually gave me a plaque and everything, actually. As a matter of fact, I've still got the plaque today. And of course, look, that's a great thing. Look, they presented that on the basis of the user group and the traction we were getting back then at the time, and the fact that we'd been around for so long. And we actually really endeavoured to do great presentations every month. We tried really, really hard to never cancel. We always did a presentation 11 months of the year, barring the end of December. And it was a great experience. You know, the Amazon Hero status comes with a lot of perks. I get to go to the Amazon conference in Las Vegas, all paid for by Amazon. They pay for the airfares and the accommodation and tickets and so on. And they have special events over there where you get to meet Werner and all, you know, Jeff Barr and all the rest of it, and have drinks with these guys. And actually, I have a very funny story. I remember being at one of these meet and greets, and look, we're all introverts, I suppose, if we work in the IT space, and there was an old guy standing in the corner looking fairly alone. I thought, oh, well, I'll go and talk to him. So I was having a great conversation to him, and he's talking about, you know, how times have changed, and I'm kind of talking about how, you know, my first computer was a DEC Ultrix, which was end of life when I was using it, and we're having a great little chuckle over that. And then suddenly these guys came up and go, oh, hi, how are you? You were the reason I got into IT. And I looked at him, and I looked at those guys, and I looked at him, and I didn't know who he was. And then it was explained to me afterwards that he was James Gosling, who was the father of Java.
Far out, okay.
I know. And then, of course, for the rest of the evening, I couldn't get a word in edgeways because he was mobbed by basically a fan group. But he was a lovely guy, just a lovely guy, lovely normal guy. Just like you and me, started off working with older technology, just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Lovely, lovely guy.
Awesome. So you stepped back from the user group about 18 months ago now, I think, in the day-to-day of the user group. What are you doing now?
Yeah, look, my startup, I finally did end up with a moderately successful startup, as you know, Rob. Not everyone's probably aware of that. So I ended up being in an acqui-hire. There's a publicly listed company in Melbourne called Cenitas who bought my startup and also bought me with it. And look, I've really just taken a step back to focus on that. They're a great company, great bunch of people, very supportive of what I'm doing. So weirdly enough, my startup has nothing to do with Amazon or AWS really in any way. So I kind of felt that after putting so much time and energy into this startup that wasn't really related to Amazon or AWS in any way, I thought I would just take a step back because I thought I was losing touch with what was happening in the AWS space. And there are many other guys like you guys who are right on top of everything that happens on a day-to-day basis in Amazon and AWS who are much better suited for running the group on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I don't think I keep up very well either with things as it goes at the moment. I think I might be going the same way as you. Leave that to the younger guys.
Nah. We're peaking now, Rob. We're peaking. This is our peak.
Still to come, man. Still to come.
50 is the new 30, Rob.
All right, I'll look forward to 50 then when I get there. So just to wrap up then, yes?
I'm not looking forward to 50 anymore. I should probably make that point.
Okay. That's good clarification. Thank you. So just to wrap up then, is there anything in particular that you'd like to see for the group that you founded going forward?
Oh, look, I think the group's in great hands. I think you've been doing a great job. I think, obviously, in today's crisis, I think the group's going to get a lot more of a digital presence and a lot more of an online presence, which is great. And one of the things I do find or foresee coming out of this is maybe we have a few user groups scattered around Australia, and maybe they may all consolidate or work together to get maybe a digital online presence, because in the digital world there's no reason why you have to have a Melbourne group or a Sydney group or a Brisbane group and all the rest of it. You can have an Amazon Australia group, which would be fantastic. And maybe right. I would hope that happen one day.
That would be nice. Like it definitely is good to transcend boundaries and borders and that sort of stuff going forward. There's no reason why your living room can't stretch halfway across the country.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Rob. We've got a little bit of an announcement to make going about the future going forward, which you're still involved with as well, of course. And then we'll throw over to our last presentation. So thanks again, Rob.
No worries. Thank you, Rob.
Okay, so we do have a little bit of an announcement to make. Last night we incorporated. We are now a registered or incorporated association here in Victoria. What does that really mean, though? So this is more or less what the group used to look like, I guess. We have a very large community. Within that community, we have a section of volunteers who help run things on a day-to-day basis, and to help out at events and find sponsors and that sort of stuff. And within that, we have a committee who have been driving things for the last couple of years. So now we just have an extra layer on that. We have a registered association layer, which just adds that little bit of extra protection for us. But most importantly, nothing has really changed. Like, nothing in what you're seeing right now is changing. Nothing that you'll see in any of our events is changing. All of our events will remain free. Like, they've always been free, and we always intend for them to remain free where they can be. And they're open to the community. They're not open to association members or anything like that. All you need to do to attend all of our events is to RSVP on meetup.com, or if we happen to be doing it through Eventbrite, registering through there. And the day-to-day is still run by the same committee members and volunteers that have been running the show for the last couple of years. And this is reflected in our legal purpose. The association was established to support the running of independent events for the community here in Victoria. We either do that directly in our usual meetup that we run every month, or this live stream now, or the podcast and other digital channels that we have going forward. Or we could do that by partnering with smaller groups and helping support them to do the same thing. But there are some benefits to doing this, otherwise we wouldn't have done it. Particularly, there are some legal benefits around it. We're now a registered non-profit organisation. We can have our own bank account as an organisation, and there's some liability protection in that as well. So if somebody happens to slip at one of our events, it's the organisation that will help support that, not me personally. There is a little bit of increased bookkeeping involved in that, but that's actually a good thing. It means though as well now that our sponsors and our vendors are dealing with an organisation directly, not just me or not one of our other committee members. We've put in some checks and balances to make sure that this group will always remain a community-owned group, and that's even more important now. And lastly, we are very proud to be independent from AWS. We do work with them, and we do receive support from them like a lot of groups when it makes sense to do so, but we are independent and we intend to remain so, and this helps with that. The other thing this does is it opens everything up. All of the association's rules, or its constitution, if you prefer that word, its structure, the meeting minutes, everything is on our website. Decisions will be on the website for the meeting minutes sometime tomorrow when I've had the chance to decompress. Decisions that we make in running the group going forward are documented, and they're in the open and they're on the website. And there is now a documented process if you want to get involved more deeply and to become a member and start helping influence the direction going forward. Like, I know, myself included, I kind of fell into this. I'm not really one to go and try and put myself into a situation where I don't know the outcome, and this is a way for people to get a bit more comfortable and certainty around that. We're limiting membership in the association though to our regular volunteers and the people who are really active in the community. That's just an overhead thing. There's no real technical reason why that is, but it just means that if you get really involved you're always at our events, you're always helping out at the events, then you can certainly apply for membership that way. And because it's an open and democratic association, any member can nominate to be on the committee. This also supports our some of the future ideas we have going forward. Like, as you've seen, we've got the podcast that was launched a couple of weeks ago, and we've got a few more ideas for content for that going forward. We've been having some chats as well around a DevOps-based competitive web series, that sort of thing. So this is also to help us support and encourage those sorts of things, and especially to get new ideas and encourage our members to participate and to bring forward ideas on what they think we can do, or do better, or do differently, or start up. If you are interested in learning more about these, I just realized I haven't switched over my presentation stuff. If you're interested in learning more about these, there is a new section on our website up in the top right hand corner. Present to camera. You will see that's there. Sorry, it's a bit difficult, actually, more difficult than I thought to run things at the same time. So there's a new section on our website up in the top right hand corner where you can find out all of the information that I've just gone through, as well as links to the official registration pages and stuff like that. So with that's that. Let's throw over to Ian. Ian, if you're sharing your screen, can you do that for me? Okay, so we'll throw over to Ian if this is all working as we hope it is working. No, I still don't see. Oh, hang on. Ian. There we go. Now I can see Ian. All right, let's switch over to this.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. Exciting new changes for the group. Good to hear. So this is creating the AWS account controller, or your rules don't apply to me. My name's Ian Mackay. I'm the lead DevOps engineer at Kablermo out of Sydney. I snuck into the Melbourne user group for just this session. I figured it was a good time to do so. I am a partner network ambassador, which means I get to do cool talks like this, and I like to break everything I touch. A bit of background on this talk. There's been this trend from an AWS employee called Sam Elmalak. He's been doing presentations every reInvent and every reinforce about landing zones and where that's going. And he's always introduced this really interesting concept about developer accounts. And these are accounts that are individual accounts isolated with minimal guardrails that developers can use to do proof of concepts or do learning or just test a couple things in an environment that they don't have to worry about cleaning up on or too much overhead with the administration of those accounts. And I thought this idea was really good. But then I started to look into this and I thought, wait, how do we clean up these accounts? How do we actually do the process and the life cycle events of doing these accounts? Company called Onikar are doing a really good job with this, with sort of recycling resources. So they use tools like AWS Nuke to clean accounts as best as they can, but it doesn't always work. And there's always new services that need to be integrated, and there's a lot of overhead with performing that action. About a year ago, I wrote this blog post called Automating AWS Account Deletion. And this was talking about the process that AWS have to perform AWS account deletion, and it's a very manual process, and theorizing some of the ways we could use to automate that. And that's what I wanted to go through today in the solutions that I'm talking about. So I wanted to quickly go through what this lifecycle looks like. So the steps to create an account under organizations is pretty simple. We call organizations.createAccount, give it an account name and a master email, and then a few seconds later we have an account. It's pretty simple. But then what does it look like to actually then remove that account? Well, the steps get a little bit more aggressive. We have to find the account's root email address, we have to request a password reset, we have to open the email that's sent, click the provided link, and all of this has captures and things involved. We set a new password for that root account, and we log in with a new password. The steps do indicate that we have to set account contact information and accept the customer agreement, but I found that these are done by organizations anyway, so we don't really have to automate anything along these lines. We have to provide a valid payment method, so that because the billing information does not get copied into an orphan account, so we have to provide a valid credit card or debit card. We have to verify ourselves by the phone. And after all those preliminary steps are completed, we can finally delete the account from that root user. And after all those steps are completed, we can then remove the account from organizations without worrying about suspensions and all sorts of problems in between. So what does automating this look like? I thought, challenge accepted. Let's give it a shot. So I came up with this solution. It's an open source solution, and it's deployable as a single CloudFormation stack. You set a number of parameters on it, and it will go ahead and set up the resources that it needs to perform these actions. It has flexible component activation, which I'll go through a little later, and it works around some of these API shortcomings, as you'll see. So let's go through those steps again. So to find the root account email address, we call organization.listAccounts. Pretty simple, just a normal API call. Then it gets a little bit more tricky. We need to request a password reset. So to do this, we actually open a headless browser in Lambda and use Puppeteer to step through the reset password actions. And there is a capture involved in here. And this is to make sure that there is a human involved with this, but I wanted to get around this. So I used a service called 2Capture to solve the capture as they come through. It's about $2 per 1,000 solved, so it's pretty economical. So next, it's send us the email. So how do we interact with that email? So we've set up a domain or a subdomain to catch all the emails that come through to that domain. We add an MX record to point to SES inbound. We place all the email content into an S3 bucket, and then we invoke Lambda to analyze that email content. It searches the body for a reset link, and if it doesn't have a reset link, we'll forward it onto the owner. And we have some interesting tricks about identifying the accounts that these emails come from to make life easier for ourselves. We then have to set up a root password, so we use Puppeteer with the to set the password with the email link. The password is automatically generated by CloudFormation, so we'll never see it. It just is stored in Secrets Manager. We then have to provide a valid payment method. So again, with Puppeteer, we fill out some billing details with a valid credit card or debit card. You do need to enter these details into the CloudFormation template, and this is also stored in Secrets Manager. So I personally use a reloadable debit card for this purpose to make things a bit easier. Note that whenever you validate your payment method, you will be billed $1 USD for every validation you do. That's about $1.61 today. We then have to verify ourselves by phone. So when we set up the solution, Puppeteer will actually create an Amazon Connect instance with a contact flow and an associated phone number. There's no APIs in Connect yet, so we have to do all these steps manually. During the verification process, we initiate the phone call by entering that Amazon Connect phone number into the setup flow. We're then presented with a 4-digit code, which we read in Puppeteer, and then store that in an SSM promoter. Connect will dynamically prompt Lambda for that code, so we know what that code is. But Connect doesn't have any way inbuilt into the IVF to send DTMF codes. That's the phone when you press a button on during a phone call. But what you can do is set dynamic prompts, WAV files. These are usually intended for instructions for a particular user to do something or to indicate what to use next. DTMF is just pure sound over the line, so we can actually dynamically select those WAV files and send them down the line to validate the service. And this actually works, surprisingly enough, and this will verify identity. Finally, we've done all the prerequisites to be able to delete an account from the root user. So we log in to account management, and it's 4 checkboxes and 2 buttons, and the account is then deleted. Once that's occurred, we can finally call organizations.remove account from organization to remove that from the organization. Now, if the account is less than 7 days old, that call will not work. It will fail. There is restrictions about the minimum time an account can be under an organization. So if it's less than 7 days old, we'll actually instead set a event bridge rule to schedule that deletion for the time the account was created plus 7 days. So that brings me to the actual account manager itself, which I named the SSO account manager. That account manager is deployed as a custom SAML application. It's deployed into SSO, again with Puppeteer, because SSO does not have any APIs. And its purpose is to do the user request to create, list, or delete accounts. For the create action, it actually adds the SSO user to account association, and it also optionally adds a billing alert so that if an account goes over a specific predefined limit, then that account can be automatically deleted, so we don't get a billing runaway. So I'd like to go through a bit of a demo about how this would work. Hopefully the demo gods are good to me today. So I've already logged into SSO here, and I've got some accounts that have already been set up, and I have my account manager application that was created for me as a part of the CloudFormation creation. So clicking through to here, it will perform a SAML authentication to make sure I am who I say I am, and then it will present to me the accounts that I already have under my user and the ability to create an account. So I wanted to do that today. So AWS Melb user group. We can optionally set the maximum budget spend, so I can just say $20 here, and we can also say some notes here as well. This by default will create an account under my specific user and only share with me, but I can also tick this button to share it with anyone who also has access to the account manager. So I click this button, and it'll wait a couple of seconds. And that account creation request has been processed. So there's a few things that are happening here. First, the account is created under organizations, and it's already given me a new account ID for that account. Second, it's going to attempt to log into that account and set that budget up. So it uses the organizational role to use CloudWatch to create a budget limit, which will let us know in a master account if that account goes over its limits. There's something to note is that when accounts are newly created like this, it takes about 60 seconds for services to actually be available for requests. Sometimes you'll get a opt-in required exception, which means the services haven't been correctly set up and we just need to wait a few more seconds for that to happen. The other thing that this is going to be doing is doing that SSO association, which means there's a Puppeteer instance running, which will correlate the account that's been created in SSO to my user so that I can authenticate to it. If I just go back to here and go into my organizations and refresh it, we can actually see that this account's been created, and then there's a few tags that are under the account. Now these tags are used for a bunch of the automation that actually happens. So I have the GUID of my SSO account, I have the budget threshold, the forwarding address, in which case this is my SSO user's email address, and the notes and a little flag that says whether the SSO creation has been completed. We'll also start getting emails at this point as well. So as you can see, the emails have been sent, but with adding a little bit of extra detail. Now this subject line is completely customizable to add or remove the information that you may want or may not want. So going back to Account Manager, this should be almost complete, hopefully. There it goes, good timing. So now that that's complete, we can go back to SSO. And we can see that the extra account has been added here. So I'd like to just quickly log into here. And then I'll perform the SAML authentication so I can log into the account as a federated login. It will select by default a hire. I have no idea why that is. That's just how the way that new accounts work these days. And then I'll go over to CloudWatch to show you the billing alarm that's been set up. Now, because I'm logged in as that federated user, if I try and interact with this billing alarm, other than the fact that it exists, I'll be denied that. So there's an SCP that blocks any action to do with that. So I can't actually get around this budget limit. And it is important to note that the budget limit is estimated every 6 hours. So it's more of a soft limit than a hard limit. You may actually burst over this, but the point is to catch any sort of runaway costs that you might have. So now that that's all demonstrated, we can log into the account. We can have accounts on demand. I'm finished with the account, so I can just select the delete button, hit delete account, and that will then go through the process of cleaning up that account. And it will put into that suspended mode where it deletes the account, but it defers the removal from the organization up to 7 days. So just a few more things under the presentation. Some of the features that are here are the flexible component activation, like I mentioned. So the create and the delete actions are completely independent. You can turn one or two of them on, depending on your choice. Like I said, there was a customizable email subject format, so you can modify the way that emails come through. You can set a maximum on your budget limits, a master maximum, so that requests to create new accounts aren't exceeding that. There is an SCP optionally to restrict subscription-based calls. So that's things like the creation of reserved instances or S3 object locks or Route 53 domains. Anything that has a long-term billing consequence, we can optionally remove that so that doesn't have a cost impact. We can optionally unsubscribe new accounts from the marketing emails by basically emulating what the unsubscribe form would do. And just this week, I've added control tower mode, which instead of directly creating the account under organizations, will use the account factory feature under control tower. So both the creation and deletion of that will be managed by control tower. And that's my talk. This is a hilariously simplified version of the architecture of that talk. And that's it. There's the GitHub there. And if there's any questions, chuck it in the chat now and I'll get it relayed to me. Thank you.
And I am off mute. Cool. That was an awesome talk, Ian. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think people are still thinking of the questions to ask, except we had one person ask a question. I'm sure you wanted to know if you would be so kind to sign his t-shirt.
Sure thing, Andrew. We'll sort that out. For those who don't know, Andrew has recently joined the AWS organization. So, yeah, that would be an interesting conflict, but sure thing.
In the meantime, I have a question I can ask you. And it's basically, this seemed like it was an incredible number of hacks that you beautifully put together. But what was the most perplexing thing, limitation, anything that you ran into while building this?
It was absolutely the DTMF hack that I went through. To have Connect, getting it set up and trying to think about how I would do this, and to run into the point where when I'm making my contact flow and saying, okay, now I need to send a DTMF tone down the line, there is no way to do this in the IVF, IVR, I forget which one. And I thought that was it. I honestly thought, okay, there's probably no way to really do this in Connect anymore. But then I was digging around in these features and I thought, wait, we can actually send wave file prompts. And I knew that DTMF was just sound over the wire. So I put this in, I put a 10-second wait in for the verification service to say its little prompt. And I had no way, and recordings of IVR flows aren't recorded as well. So I had no way to verify whether this was actually going to work. And there's that moment of elation where I'm looking at a screen, I've executed it through the automation, and I'm just looking at the screen, and all of a sudden I get this big tick and said verification complete. Most euphoric thing I've ever seen. It was an incredible feeling, and I knew that was a really fun time.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like that. Cool. We've been getting some questions now, though, so let me hold up the first one. This is from Guy Morton. He wants to know, does anything ever go completely wrong? Because there are so many moving parts to this. Does the system fail?
Yeah, I've had to put in a lot of guardrails around the way that this automation works. One of the biggest things that can go wrong is the capture responses can be not aligned to what we get from the service. That's occasional, but we do have retries in place so that if that happens and we detect that there's an error based on those captures, it will retry. Every so often, I'll hit some sort of curveball, or if an account's being modified in a way that makes it weirdly not accessible, then it can sometimes break. But the key thing to note is that the SSO account manager, the app, all it's really doing is tagging these accounts. And then there's event rules that act off those tags under the accounts. So you can actually manually retry a lot of these actions pretty quickly by untagging and retagging a certain tag. So yeah, it can go wrong very occasionally, but very easy to recover from.
Yep. So a fairly straightforward question from Paul Silver. He just wants to know the URL for the GitHub.
Yeah, the URL is actually on screen. Let me see if I can get that a bit more bigger. The URL is github.com/IANN0036 / AWS account controller. So you can go there. There's a one-click CloudFormation button that you can use, and you can go from there. The solution's only tested in North Virginia, but it's very easy to deploy your own in any of the other regions.
Cool. So the next question from Tim Malone is, did you actually consider using Amazon Mechanical Turk instead for the CAPTCHA?
For the CAPTCHA, yes. I did consider this. I think the timings of it don't make sense. I think the lead time on a hit for a Mechanical Turk is longer than the expiry of a certain CAPTCHA response. So I actually needed a dedicated service to do this. But yes, I did think about it.
Cool. A related follow-up question from my co-organizer. Is this proof that CAPTCHAs are useless?
They certainly slow you down. But most things that are designed to verify humans can be overridden somehow, even with other humans.
Yeah. And one more question from Tim. Just roughly estimated, how many hours do you think you spent on this solution?
Man hours. Okay. I think if we include the initial work I did during that original blog post I did about automating account creation, I would probably say it's about 40 hours. I think there's a lot of research into there, but a lot of the automation was fairly quick. It's just about, waiting for the right amounts, getting account limits increased so I can, get more accounts than the generic 4 that they give you by default. But yeah, I think it's not excessively long. I just think there's a bit of research that goes into this before you make it all automated and pretty and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Then one final question from Guy. Does this break AWS's terms and conditions?
Yeah, good question. I'm not a lawyer, and my response to this is genuinely that I don't know, and probably yes, but they're not really going to enforce it unless you are doing something to the service that actually affects other customers. They probably could detect this, but whether they would want to or not, I'm not sure. And whether they would particularly care, I'm not sure. The only way that they would care is if you start abusing the service. So that means excessively creating a number of accounts or using free team limits beyond what's defined in the terms of service. And those sort of actions, which detriment the service as a whole, are probably not advised, and I wouldn't really use the solution for that because you'll be putting your own accounts at risk. But generally, I think that it's one of those don't tell, don't speak sort of situations. It's been retweeted by a bunch of people in the Amazon org. Even Jeff Barr has had a look at it and said, great work, tweeted that out. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ian, it's an awesome project. So thank you again for presenting about it and showing us how it works.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Am I on? Am I not? Am I on? I think I'm on. Thanks, guys. I know, Ian, you've spent a lot of time looking into that over the last, I think it was 2 years, something like that now. Definitely a labor of love, if there ever was one. They should definitely be paying you for stuff like that, not doing it for free. But either way, thanks very much for taking the time to dial in from Sydney and give us that overview. So just to wrap things up, I'm going to do my slide over to the left again, to the right even. Our next event is on the 27th of May. With any luck, we're out of lockdown by then and we can go back to our normal events. If not, we'll be here on YouTube either way. I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors, Enabler, AC3 and CMD for their support again during 2020. I'd like to thank our two presenters as well, Dawn and Ian, for their contributions to tonight. It's greatly appreciated. As well to Ian and to JM for the new segments and for helping run the event, and for Rob for taking time out of your schedule to drop in and let us know, tell us about the early days. It's very interesting to see some of the stories that I haven't actually heard before myself. So I got a lot out of that. So for now, we're going to do there is a virtual drinks event, I guess, over on Zoom. If you would like to join in after I get off the stream, the link has been posted into the Melbourne channel on our Slack team. So we'll see you there. If not, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in a month.